Welcome to the Cultivating Potential podcast. Today we are joined by Erica Anderson. She is the founding partner of Proteus, a coaching, consulting, and training firm that focuses on leadership readiness. Erica advises senior execs in companies like Viacom, CBS, Nike, Spotify, Sony, and on organizational visioning and strategy and team development and their evolution as leaders. Today, she's going to share with us her wisdom and insights on her book, Growing Great Employees, Turning Ordinary People into Extraordinary Performers. So welcome, Erica. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you. I'm thrilled and honored to be here.
Yes, and I just discovered before we started the podcast, this is your book baby, your original book, and we'll talk about more of the long list of great books you got out there at the end. But thank you for talking about this one with our group, because that's what this podcast is all about. How do we cultivate the potential of our employees? Because quite frankly, if you look at leaders throughout history, that's one of the aspects, or a very important part of the aspects that made them a great leader, is their ability to bring out the best of their employees. So we want to thank you again. So let's jump right into the questions. And the first one I always like to start with is, what inspired you, or what's the story behind the book? How did we get Growing Great Employees?
Okay, so back into the past. So Growing Great Employees came out almost 15 years ago. As I said, it was the first book that I wrote. And the reason I wrote the book, this may sound odd, is because the initial reason was I couldn't find it. And what I mean by that is the books so this is around 2005, the books that existed about management were, at least the ones I know of, were generally either sort of not necessarily superficial, but kind of top line, like 1 Minute Manager or 5 ways to make employee, kind of tips.
Uh-huh.
Or they were very dense, substantial, Peter Drucker-esque type books. And what I wanted was kind of the boy and Girl Scout handbook for management. What
Wow.
a very accessible and common language kind of book that could help a manager, a new manager, or a manager who'd been doing it for a while but wanted to up their skills, just understand that life cycle. Like, how do I get the right people, and how do I get them started, and how do I keep them growing, and then how do I transition them either up or out or to different jobs, to just give managers a very practical support that they needed. So I wrote it.
I love that. That's a sign of a great leader. When they can't find what they're looking for, they create it. So I understand that. And we thank you for taking the initiative to do that. Because obviously, sometimes we need a little more than those 1 minute nudges. And we definitely
Yes.
don't want to read the encyclopedia version always. That's a great inspiration. And we're glad that you did. So tell us why the gardening theme. For those that haven't read Erica Anderson's book, Growing Great Employees, it's about cultivating human potential like you would a garden. And so I'm very curious as to why you chose that theme.
Yeah. So as I started writing the book, which was a year or two before it came out, um, I was also really getting into gardening. This is 15 or 20 years ago. And I noticed some important similarities between gardening and managing. And
Mhm.
if those of you who are listening who are gardeners will understand this, one of the important truths about being a gardener is that you cannot make a plant grow. All you can do is get the right plant for the situation
Hmm.
and give it the optimal circumstances it needs, the right amount of light and water, and sometimes even and nutrients, and sometimes even neighbors. Like, some plants grow better around some plants than others. And I thought, wow, that is really like managing people. You cannot make a person grow, but you can create really optimal circumstances for them. You can
Mm,
do everything possible to support their growth. And
yeah.
then, as I thought more about this metaphor, I realized that one of the ways in which the metaphor was really going to work well is, have you ever gardened? Are you a gardener at all?
Well, I'm telling you, it's funny that you're explaining all this, because I found an app. I've always been a plant killer, and obviously the pandemic has had me looking for things to, and you see here.
Yes, there's a plant back there.
Improve my environment with plants. And I found one that helps me in that way of knowing when to water and when to fertilize and where to put it.
Okay.
So I'm new to the game of gardening or taking care of plants. So
Okay. So one thing you're probably finding out, which is what something that everyone who gets into gardening finds out, is that the soil is critically important. How
mm,
you prepare it. So is it loose and friable, and does it have good nutrients in it? And in my mind, that's analogous to managers to listening. I
mm,
feel like listening is that key foundational skill that prepares people, that prepares the relationship. If you start your role with anyone as a manager by listening well to really understand them, who they are, what they need, it's also such a powerful way to
mm,
communicate respect and to
yeah,
communicate uh, power, to give people power by giving them your attention. And so
sure.
that's yet another way that the gardening metaphor worked really well. So I really just use that metaphor throughout the book. I'm sure if you read, people who read the book get a little tired of it by the end, but it really worked as a metaphor.
Well, and I love that about listening. Obviously, as a design thinking consultant, listening's a big piece of what we do. And you're right, it gives them power through respect and through earning their trust. I think another way it gives them power is that it gives them a voice, even if it's just
Yes.
to their leader, they're having a voice. And that's a big piece of having a personal power. So
Oh, I love that. And Karen, I couldn't agree more. I feel like managers, leaders who listen well, one of the things they do exactly as you say is give people voice, and it helps them to solve their own problems and come to their own
yeah.
conclusions, so that the manager isn't the knower of all, giver of all answers. So
Yeah.
yeah, I completely agree with what you're saying.
Well, and in the spectrum of growing, what a confidence builder that is for an employee to be able to share their
Yes.
voice and the manager to be affirming where they can be affirming or redirecting where they need to redirect as far as their skills or their instructions.
100%. Another thing I point out, the first chapter of the book, as you know, is about listening. And one of the pushbacks, I'm sure you've gotten this, that we always get about listening is it takes too much time. People always say, oh, it takes too much time. So I did this funny thing in that chapter where I had a conversation, I wrote a conversation between a guy and his manager. And in the first iteration of it, she just isn't listening to him. She's just kind of half listening while she does other things and kind of blows him off. And by the end, he leaves frustrated because he didn't really get to share his problem, and he didn't get any of her insight. He didn't get any direction from her. So then in the book, as you can do when you're writing things, and I rewrote the conversation as with her listening.
Hmm.
And by the end, they've had a great communication. He's gotten the insight in the direction he needs. He's ready to go off and, be his own leader. And I wrote them using exactly the same number of words
Oh, wow.
as a kind of trick, but as a kind of way to say, no, it
Does
actually, when you listen, it can actually speed things up. You can
Yeah.
you can avoid misunderstanding, you can come to conclusions more quickly, you can make things happen actually more quickly. So I just wanted to sort of, cut the knees out from under that objection right away.
Yeah. And what a great way to do that. It kind of reminds me, I think it's a Drucker quote about doing things, taking the time to do things right versus, taking the time to do them again.
Yes, 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 versus having to do them over. That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what it does. Wow. Well, I love the metaphor, and it to me, it's a great one. Uh, the next question: why do you think, and maybe this is an obvious one, but I bet you unpack it a lot in the book that will help our listeners, and that is why is people management so critical, especially in the times that we are in today? I mean, obviously you wrote this book in 2005, but I think
Yeah.
it's just as relevant in
Yeah. Yeah.
2021 as it was in 2005.
Well, there's so much I could say about this. I'm very fond of this question. Um, And I'll start with the facts. There's a lot of data that shows that in companies where people say they are managed well and say that their managers are supportive and have good skills and give them clear direction and make sure they have resources, those companies tend to be more successful. So there's just good data that shows that
Oh,
people management makes a difference in terms of how happy
yeah.
people feel and how successful their companies are. But if I just talk about beyond the data, my point of view, it goes back to a lot what we were just talking about a few minutes ago. That when people are managed well, they have self agency. They feel
Mm,
powerful. They feel trusted. They're able to be their best. And it's
mm,
so funny because so many companies say, people are our biggest asset. Well, if you don't manage them well, they won't feel like that and they won't be able to behave like that. So
mm.
it really allows people to do what they can do now and to learn more so that they can grow and do more as time goes on.
Wow. And as you're saying, they're our greatest asset. I'm thinking about managers that I hear saying um, they're the biggest challenge or the biggest difficulty. And you wonder what is the connection between the way they're managing them, the
Yes.
fact that they see them as a big problem or a big
Yes.
challenge.
Totally agree. And people are definitely the most challenging part of managing in an organization because they're not inanimate objects, they push back, they have their own ideas. But
Yeah.
if you can see them as fellow human beings, equal human beings, who you have this noble, people management is kind of a noble thing. You are, when you're someone's manager, you are better positioned probably than anyone else in their life to
Mm.
see what they're capable of and to help them accomplish that professionally.
Yeah.
And it sometimes it is challenging and it is hard. Human beings are so unique and we're all big bundles of emotion and thought, and if you can see it as a worthwhile challenge,
Sure.
then you can really help yourself, those employees, and the company.
Now, you mentioned briefly perspective. I want to dig into that just a little bit more because it seems to be coming up for me in a lot of my conversations. And talk to me about perspective and the perspective the book encourages managers to have, as well as what perspective do they gain in the listening and growing the environment that they need to. Um, just perspective as a whole from this book. What is your thoughts on that?
I love that question, and I would pick up on what we were just talking about. That my belief, and it has been supported by evidence for many many years, is that managers who go into managing with what we've come to call the coach mindset, by
Hmm.
which I mean believing in people's potential
Mm,
and wanting to help them succeed. If that's
sure.
your core operating philosophy, that these people I have potential and I want to help them succeed, and it's my job to help them succeed.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes it turns out occasionally people don't have potential or they don't want to succeed or they continue to get in their way, and then you have to deal with them respectfully and kind of moving them out of the organization. But if you come in with that assuming capability, assuming positive intent, that's really important. And then once you have that core perspective of assuming of potential and
Mm,
assuming that your job is to help pull out that potential, then I think it's incumbent upon the manager to gain those skills. And they're real skills. It's not just happy talk, the
mhm.
real skills that allow them to deliver on that promise. And that's what the book is about. It's about real skills: listening, feedback, making clear agreements, delegating, coaching, all the things that good managers do to keep that garden of human beings healthy.
Now, on the listening piece, now obviously we're listening to them in the context of business and the job they do and the goals that we have for them on our team, but how kind of as a secondary listening going on in the background are managers able to tune into what the potential is for their employees, the potential that's going to make them like the plants thrive and
Yes,
grow
yes.
and just be vibrant and flourish.
Yeah, that's great too. So when we talk about listening, we meaning my colleagues and I at Proteus, we talk a lot about curiosity. So you know about listening, you talk about listening. Listening isn't just not talking while the other person is speaking, right? So listening is really inviting them to share themselves, to share what they know, what they see, what they're worried about. And the thing that really gives that life is curiosity on the part of the manager. So I've written a lot about curiosity in some of my subsequent books. It really plays a large role. The way I define curiosity is the urge to understand and master.
Hmm.
So it's that urge that babies have all the time, like, how does this work? And how do I
Yeah.
do this? And if I
Oh,
eat it, will it break my teeth?
yeah.
Babies are just relentless, babies and little kids. And if
Oh,
we can re-engage that as adults, and especially as managers, to really get curious about the people who work for us, like, what's motivating this person and how do they feel about it? What do they know? And what do they want to know?
mm,
What's inspiring to them? Managers who combine a curiosity about their function or their company and what will make it better going forward, and curiosity about the employee they're talking to, how might those things fit together? How might they grow in a way that benefits both them and the company?
yeah.
Then that curiosity is beneficial to everyone.
Oh yeah. I love that because I actually just did a video where I talk about the need that a human has to express themselves and the need that the company has on some goal or performance. There actually is a marriage. It's just that we have to look for it and dig for it. So
Precisely.
yeah, I love that. Totally agree. Um, let's talk about from the point of view, what are the necessities of being a good people manager? So what's necessary for those that might be listening that are new to the realm of leadership or managing people, or maybe someone who just knows that it's an area they need to improve on,
Yeah.
and the economies of our time are not going to sit around and wait any longer for managers to get on board with uh, handling and cultivating their employees' potential.
Yeah.
What are the necessities for those?
Well, the three big buckets we think in are mindset, process, and skills.
Hmm.
So, in order to be a good manager of people, it starts inside your head. It starts with your self talk, right?
Sure.
And you know that we all talk to ourselves all the time. A lot of the time, it's pretty random and banal and it doesn't matter. It's like, oh, I like oranges. Oh, that guy has a big nose. We're just
Yeah.
saying random
Yeah.
stuff to
Oh, I
ourselves,
need
right?
to get the dry cleaning on the way home.
Precisely. Did I turn off the stove? Um, but sometimes it's really unhelpful. Sometimes our self talk is unsupportive of us, unsupportive of other people. Like, for instance, when you're a manager of people, too often your self talk, like, for instance, and our self talk is different about different people. So one person comes into your office or onto your Zoom screen and you think, oh, that guy, and how is that conversation going to go, right?
Sure.
And another person comes and you go, oh, I always love talking to her. How is that conversation going to go? So to
Sure.
really recognize your self-talk and recognize when it's not helpful, when it's not supportive, when it's limiting or dismissive or even biased,
Hmm.
recognize that and shift it, because
Yeah.
that's one of the unheralded and unknown things that we can do. A lot of people don't know that they can actually change their self talk, they can shift how they're talking to themselves.
Sure.
So I think both recognizing and being able to manage your self talk is key to being a good manager. That's a whole, we could talk about that for about 6 hours. And
Yeah.
then, oh, sorry.
It's an awareness, really,
Yes.
because so often the stuff going on in our head, we're not even aware of it. And I think for what you're talking about there, it really boils down to being aware of and then eliminating judgments and really not accepting of people as they are or
Yes.
who they are. Hmm.
Precisely. And one of the things I've discovered over the years is that it's easier to change something than it is to get rid of it. If you try and get rid of something, it's sort of like not thinking about an elephant. It's really
Yeah.
sort of impossible. But
Yeah.
if for instance you're saying to yourself um, something biased, for instance, like, let's say you're saying to yourself, oh, I don't think women have as much potential to be leaders as men. Some people actually think that,
Yeah.
strangely.
Yeah.
You can't just try and somehow magically make yourself not think it. But what you can do, and what's easy or easy-ish for most people, is to turn that into a hypothesis
Mm,
rather than coming to that conclusion, women can't be as good. I wonder, I've always thought that. I wonder if women can be
yeah.
good
Get
leaders as
curious
men
about
can.
your own mind's
Precisely.
judgments. Yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And that will often just lead you down a whole different path, and it will make you enter into conversations with people who against who you may have either systemic or personal biases, just in a different, more open way.
Yeah. And when you think about it, obviously leaders and managers, they want to reach their full potential as leaders and managers. And when you think about the type of thoughts that you're talking about there, the biases and the negative ones, they're very limiting. So
Yes.
when you cannot have unlimited potential for yourself, even if your thoughts are limited.
That's a great point. I think that's exactly right. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. So then the second thing we talk about is process. Like, do you know those good, simple cadences and processes? Simple things like having regular team meetings and giving your people regular times to share feedback. And do you have good processes for development? Do you have good processes for communication? All those kinds of things. I feel like it seems so. I mean, I remember once talking to a client, this is probably 20 years ago, and he was saying, that process stuff, I'm terrible at it, but I know it's important. And I think almost all of us think of it as, oh, that process stuff. But it's, and this is going to sound strange, but for a manager, having good management processes and cadences is like brushing your teeth every day
Yeah.
or walking the dog. It's just those good habits to get into that allow your people to create their own cadences of productivity.
Yeah.
So
And don't
processes are second.
On the processes note, I think, well, a couple of things I think about. One is how much they likely changed for in a lot of organizations during the pandemic,
Yes.
obviously, because everyone went to work from home for quite a bit. But then also, even as we transition to the experience age, I think processes are going to continue to evolve. Um, what are your thoughts on what are the most challenging process changes that leaders are having to embrace right now and cultivate the potential for the employees to meet those?
It's a really important question because I don't what I've been saying to people lately is the pandemic jump started us, fast forwarded us all into some virtual ways of working that we were kind of starting to do, but most of us weren't doing full bore. And I don't
Yeah.
think it's ever going to go all the way back. I mean,
Yeah.
I just wrote something the other day where I was basing it on some research that I'd read, that 2/3 of the people who have been working virtually want to keep working virtually.
Yeah.
So we're never going to go all the way back. And one of the things that I've noticed, and many of the people I've been talking to have noticing this, one of my team members was just talking to me about this, is it's much easier for some reason when you're working virtually to be too transactional, to
Yeah.
not take the time to make those little human connections that we did so naturally when we were in the same room with each other.
Yeah.
So, like, for instance, I was talking about how when I facilitate a group, like often I facilitate groups to do planning or whatever, w-
Hmm.
as they come on one by one, I just start talking to them like I would if we were in a room together. How are you
Sure.
doing? How's the weather where you are? Where are you, by the way? And so by the time everybody's there, we're having this sort of natural, easy conversation. And then we can stop and just turn into what we're doing, but it feels better. It feels more
Yes.
human. So
Yeah.
I feel like part of the process that we're going to have to do as we still continue to work more virtually than we had before is just remember to put in those little times of communication, connection,
Yeah.
personal, how are you? How's the family? Hey, it looks sunny wherever you are,
Yeah.
to just do
Yeah.
that. So that's a kind of a new process reminder that I think we all need to make for ourselves.
And I think it's a good point because we do still need that connection, that bring that human element into our work. Otherwise, uh, what can be mundane or exhausting at times loses even more
Absolutely.
lackluster. So
There's a wonderful book that was written, I think, in the early 80s called Megatrends by a guy named John
yeah.
Nesbitt. You remember that?
Mhm. Yeah, I remember
And
it.
one of he talked about these 10 megatrends, and one of them he called high tech, high touch, which was
Mm,
so prescient 40 years
yeah.
ago. And he said that as we get more and more technologically savvy and do more things technologically, our need to touch each other emotionally and even physically is going to go up. And he saw those two things going up simultaneously. And I see that even more during the pandemic.
Yeah. I'll have to look him up and see what he's writing about lately since the ability to touch and connect is seems even more distant.
Yeah.
Um, well, gosh, I can't believe our 30 minutes is already up, but
Oh, wow.
I know it
Hey,
goes too.
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
There's something I really want to talk
Okay.
about skills. And so
Yeah.
maybe as you go
Yes.
through and edit this, you can take out some other stuff to make room for that.
Oh no, let's keep all the goodness in. Go ahead.
Well, so the third thing, you asked me the three things, and I said mindset, process, and skills. And I really want to talk about skills for a minute, partly because that's primarily what Growing Great Employees is about, but partly because that's what we've seen over the years really is the difference between an okay manager and a good manager. And a
Mm,
lot of times people don't recognize that. They think management is somehow, I don't know what they think. I mean, most of us got to be managers, if we did, by one day our boss walked into our office and said, "Oh, starting tomorrow, you're going to be managing these three people. Good
yeah.
luck with that." It's like,
Yeah.
wait, I don't know how to. And so what we realized years ago is that managing is like being a carpenter. You have to have good carpentry skills. Being a
Yeah.
ballet dancer, you got to have good ballet skills. And so those core skills of listening, of making clear agreements with people, of being able to give them feedback, both constructive and positive, of being able to delegate, that's a huge skill. Being able to
Yeah.
coach, right? All those things are skill based, just like a carpenter has to learn how to nail and level and plane. Managers have to learn how to do those things. And I
Mhm.
think for managers to realize that, then they go, oh, how do I learn that? And then they make it part of their job to learn how to do those things that are so critical for managing people.
Yeah, I love that. And the skills, the great thing about learning skills like that as managers is so much of that can be turned around and be taught to your employees,
Totally.
and they can become leaders in their own right. Maybe they're not managing people, but they're autonomous and they're leading the charge and they're achieving their
Oh
objectives and
man.
all the things that leaders
Yeah,
do.
no, I absolutely agree with that. In fact, often over the years when we've done, training programs, which we now do virtually for high potential leaders in organizations, one of the characteristics of high potential leaders is they do viralize. They turn around and go, "Oh, I just learned this thing about giving feedback here. Let me pass it on to you so you can use it."
Yeah, yeah.
So I completely agree with that.
Well, and to me, I think I was reading recently, it's a way, especially if it's a new habit for us or a new skill for us, it's a way to build those neural pathways that kind of
Yes,
ingrain
yes,
it
yes.
into our system is when we teach it. So
Yeah, somebody wonderful, maybe Mahatma Gandhi said something about teaching is learning,
yeah,
which I completely agree with.
yeah, totally. Well, one final question, and then we'll wrap
Yeah.
up and share some additional good resources. And that is, okay, if you could, if if is there one thing leaders listening today, if they could take away just to go back to their office now and cultivate the potential of their employees, what would your advice be to them? Just
I
do this
have to
one thing
say, I
today.
have to say two.
Okay.
Listening and self-talk. If you can become a really good, really curious listener and
Mhm.
you can learn to manage and shift your unhelpful self-talk, that's sort of 75% of the battle, really.
It's interesting. Listen to yourself, switch it, and then listen to your employees.
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
Exactly.
double on the listening. Great stuff. Thank you so much, Erica, for joining me today, for the wisdom and the experience that you've shared with us. If you've enjoyed this interview, let me give you some additional information. You can connect with Erica on LinkedIn and Twitter at Erica Anderson, which is spelled Erika Anderson, Andersen. She regularly shares excellent content there, as well as her popular leadership blog on Forbes.com and her other books, which all sound phenomenal. I'm going to go check out another one right after this. Be Bad First, Leading So People Will Follow, Being Strategic, and also on the Proteus Leadership Show, which she is the creator and host of that podcast that gives quick and practical support for leaders. Thanks so much.
Oh, you're so welcome. This was delightful.